What's going on, guys? Today we are at the site of the burial of our nation's 18th president, Ulysses S. Grant, who served from 1869 to 1877. This site, at the time of his death until probably about 1920, was the most visited site in the United States, the biggest tourist attraction in the country, because Grant was a nationwide hero for leading the Union to victory during the American Civil War. However, his presidency is a different story. We're going to get into that here in a second. And most importantly today, we're going to be screaming his name for smash in front of his grave. Because when you lead the Union to victory, you deserve it for smash. So let's get a little closer. So look how grand this is. So this is, I didn't mention the location, this is right on Manhattan Island in New York City. It's where he's buried, because New York was obviously the biggest city in the country, probably one of the biggest cities in the world at the time when he died. So he died in 1885. Like I said, this is the most visited site in the country for about 40 years after he died, so pretty cool. And it's interesting to note that people referred to him as General Grant as opposed to President Grant, even after his presidency, because the Civil War, he had the biggest prowess, more so than his presidency. So he was always referred to as General Grant. We're just walking around the side right now. That was the back, I guess. This is the front. This thing's really big. He died in 1885, and this was during the time where the heads of state in the U.S. were buried in grand tombs. You don't see this anymore. This is certainly a grand tomb if I've ever seen one.
I wonder what the story is on all these benches.
I don't know the design on these benches, like this tiles or whatever. Here's actually the front. Really nice design here. So I guess you can go in. I don't know if we can go in, but I'll just do some information out here. So like I said, the most visited site in the U.S. and of every tourist attraction at the time of his death for about 40 years. This was the place. So Grant was born in 1822 in Point Pleasant, Ohio. He's the first Ohio president of the many that they've had. He was born with the name Hiram Ulysses Grant, but he ended up changing his name later in life because when he was a kid, people made fun of him because his initials spelled the word hug. So I don't know why he was so offended by that, but he was. So he changed his name to Ulysses S. Grant, and S stands for nothing. After he grew up, he attended West Point Military Academy and served in the Mexican-American War, and he was a big military guy throughout his young adult life. In 1864, he gained nationwide recognition because Lincoln appointed him to be General of the Armies in the Civil War, and by that point in the war, the Union had already turned the tides around. Gettysburg had already happened here before, so the Union was pretty much going to win, and Grant came in and led them to victory the last 2 years. That gained him nationwide fame. Everybody loved Grant. So by the time he ran for president in 1868, he won in a landslide. Everybody was going to vote for Grant. It didn't matter if George Washington was back from the dead. Grant was winning that election. There's no way he wasn't going to win. So he serves 2 terms. 1869 is when he gets in, leaves in 1877. He's the first president to serve 2 terms since Andrew Jackson. Although Lincoln was elected to 2 terms, he got assassinated. So Grant he's a very mixed bag when it comes to looking back on his presidency. He had really good intentions, but was very ineffective. When he first got in office, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed. Although Lincoln commissioned that in 1862, it was completed during his presidency, the first way of transportation from coast to coast in the U.S. He was a strong advocate for Reconstruction, which was happening after the Civil War. He brought back many of the seceded states in the South back to the Union and tried to disincorporate all the Jim Crow laws that were established in the South, giving blacks all the recognition that they deserved. However, a lot of the things that he tried to do were ineffective. He passed a bill, the Federal Elections Bill, which gave the federal government action of presiding over elections in the South, because many of the southern states tried to infringe upon black rights to vote. It also prohibited segregation. However, in 1883, after he left office, the Supreme Court declared it unconstitutional, leading to almost another century of segregation in the South. Also, Grant was the first president to issue a national park. Yellowstone National Park was founded in 1872 during his administration. However, he had a really mixed stance, in my opinion, on Native Americans. The Indian Appropriations Bill was passed in 1871, which was an interesting case where he tried to assimilate all Native Americans into the U.S.'s sovereign state. Now, this was a thing that was very common called white man's burden. Basically, Grant had good intentions with this bill, but it wasn't good in action because he believed that assimilating Native Americans into U.S. culture, basically educating them, making them speak English, putting them on reservations, would protect them from being killed, because many people out west, where all these wars were going on, were trying to kill them all. But the Europeans did the same thing in Africa. This basically eliminated all Native American culture, which was bad. Although a lot were going to die regardless because they couldn't defend themselves from the white man. This eliminated a lot of their culture, and I don't really support that act, but he had good intentions with it. Also, the first coinage of silver was emitted during his presidency by the U.S. Mint. But all the Native American scandals and things like that led to the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876, which was the last push out in Montana to get all the Native Americans to reservations, which really ended that. And a lot of Native American wars took place out west. So Grant was a really mixed bag. Another thing that was ineffective, he tried to expand upon our oceanic solitaire by trying to get a colony in the Dominican Republic, which the Senate did not ratify, and also created Hawaii as a protectorate and islands out in the Pacific. So a lot of that was ineffective. He also pushed for civil service reform, trying to de-corrupt the government. He put down the Ku Klux Klan, but all these things eventually backfired on him because the Civil Service Commission was ineffective, as most of the senators at the time, actually all of them before the passage of the 17th Amendment in 1913, were all elected by the General Assembly and not the people, because this was still that time in American history. So a lot of that was ineffective. He's infamous for appointing a lot of his corrupt buddies to the administration, which most people in Congress did not support, and there were two major scandals taking place in his administration during his presidency. So Grant had a lot of really good intentions, but couldn't get a lot done because of the Democratic-Republican society that the U.S. lives in. Congress did not support a lot of the things that he did because he was not of their breed. He was not a politician. He was a military guy. So regardless, the American people loved him, and he won both of his elections in a landslide. And he starts the period of Republican domination in the United States. It was so bad that in 1872, the DNC nominated a Republican, Horace Greeley, to the ticket, which he still destroyed. And between Grant's presidency and the Great Depression in 1929, every single administration was Republican except for two. So we're heading on to the gravesite. He died in 1885, just 8 years after leaving office. He died of cancer. He was the only president to die of cancer, which is interesting because how many Americans have died of that disease? He was 63 years old when he died. He actually published an autobiography days and weeks before his death. So that's pretty interesting. Cool, we can actually go in here because some of the graves I've been to, you can't actually go inside.
This reminds me of McKinley.
So here's these are some of the generals during the Civil War. Pearson, right here. William Tecumseh Sherman, this is one of his biggest allies during the Civil War. He led the March to the Sea. Grant and Sherman's team, between those two, won the Civil War for the Union. So Grant's more well known for his prowess during the Civil War rather than his presidency. He was the guy. There's Ord. Cops. shows a map of all the Union strongholds that took place back from the Confederacy. Principal battles of the Civil War marked by this. Addition to the star denotes the battle in which General Grant had personal part. So Grant was at 5 Forks, Petersburg, Richmond, Cold Harbor City Point. This is Pennsylvania. Appomattox, this is where Robert E. Lee surrendered at the end of the war in April 1865. Chattanooga, Tennessee. Fort Knox and Fort Henry. His biggest battles for him, for Grant's victory, was Chattanooga and also the Battle of Vicksburg in Mississippi. Vicksburg campaign, also Shiloh, he had Shiloh as well, Shiloh. All right, guys, now time for the scream. Ulysses S. Grant for smash!